Very good morning to you. My name is Richard Gawkin, and I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning and wish you a very big welcome to the first session in the Milner Brown Academy 2023. So before we begin and have a look at what we're going to cover today and maybe discuss the format that these sessions are going to take, just a little bit of housekeeping really. So we're going to record today's session. So we'll distribute that to any attendees along with any slides that we're showing today. So please take your time, immerse yourself in today's session. There'll be little need to take notes. We'll give you all of that at the end afterwards. We will also ask if you can complete a very short 2-minute survey, just giving your feedback on today's session and let us know how it went, what you felt about it, whether you got some value from it. But as we go through today's session, there will be an opportunity towards the end to ask any questions. So hopefully within your control panel for Zoom, you should see a button that says Q&A. If you could just click into that, you should be able to raise any questions in there. Please feel free to either type those in as we go along, or you can do so at the end, but we'll address all of those at the end and hopefully get you answers in near real time to any questions that you have. But if you do think of anything, maybe after the session, you wish you'd asked the question, you could please feel free to either contact your account manager at Milner Brown or contact our support team, or really anyone at Milner Brown would be absolutely delighted to help. Okay, so if that's okay, we'll get into today's agenda and just go over what we're going to cover. So we're going to begin by looking at how to navigate the system, what elements there are of the user interface, and really how you can maximize how you're using that. So many of you will be using the system for a number of years. Some of you might be very new to using SAP Business One. Regardless of what level that you're at, there's always some shortcuts, some things that other people might be doing that you don't know about. So we can look at a few of those elements today and just make sure that you're getting to the point that you need to quickly and efficiently with minimal clicks. We'll also be looking at how you can provide control around the system. So how you can control what users see and what users can actually do. So there's a whole user authorization management, which many people will have settings applied, user controls applied, read-only settings, full access. But I really want to just take you through some of the aspects as to how you can manage that efficiently. So are you using groups? How do groups work? How can we copy permissions between users when staff leave and new staff join the business? We'll have a discussion on data, how to back up data and restore. So when you have a database, whether you're operating in a single company or whether you have several companies that you're working across, how can we take the data, physically back it up and restore that, whether it be to a new company or whether you're reacting to some sort of data corruption that may have occurred. So we'll look at that element. System monitoring and maintenance. So I'm aware that some of you on the call today will be very technical, but there may be other people who are less technical. And I think what I would like to cover today is the discussion in terms of the important elements of what keeps your system running fluidly, what keeps things running at peak performance, what are the potential pitfalls, what things do we need to keep an eye on. And I think regardless of whether you want to know the commands that have to be typed in order to go and get access to these things, or whether you just want to know what the main things to look out for in a SAP Business One system are, this section will be for you. So if you're not technical, please, hopefully you'll still find some value from that as well. We'll speak about upgrades and patches. So what are major version upgrades? What are patches, or as we now call them, feature packs? What are the difference between the two? How often are these things released? How long do they last? How often should we be updating the SAP Business One system to keep it up to date? Um, I'll speak to you about the web client. So the web client is probably one of SAP's more recent features, especially for companies who have been using the system for a good number of years. You may not know that it exists. You may have never used it before. You may have heard about it and wonder what it's all about, what it can do, what it can't do. So I'll be able to cover those elements with you today. Security. So in terms of how do we keep your system safe? There's a few elements to that. Obviously, user authorization is one aspect of that, but what are the other things that SAP have done in order to keep your data and your system safe, and what things might you need to go and look out for in order to maintain that safety of your system? We'll also, and we'll do the same as we go through most of these sessions, where we would like to tell you about some of the things that our other clients are doing. So how they're taking the Business One system that really comes out of the box with minimal configuration, and how have we used other tools and solutions to add to their system? What, in general terms, how do customers take advantage of these tools and use them to their advantage to solve particular problems? So we'll take a look at some of those things today. One in terms of platform related. So many of you might be aware already that Milner Brown offer hosting. We'll go into what hosting is, what type of hosting we can provide, discuss the pros and cons, and whether that might be any use for your business, or at least give you the information so you can be informed to make those decisions. And finally, we'll finish with something called the Boyum Usability Pack. So I'll speak about what the Boyum Usability Pack is, and then we can go into a demonstration showing what it can do, what situations it might be useful for. It might very well be the tool that you need that you don't know about today in order to solve some particular problem that you have. And just as a reminder again, if you do have any questions as we go along, please just pop those into the chat, and we can take care of those at the end if that's okay. Excellent. Okay, so let's get into the details. So let's begin on the first point: navigation and user interface. Now, the first point I would like to make is this screen that you see now, this slide that we're looking at. It's not necessarily the view that all of you will have. I think as we go through these sessions, one important distinction, if you don't know already, is that there are two looks and feel of SAP Business One. And that would be particular to the database engine that your system is running on. So you may have heard SQL or SQL would be one version that we have, and the other version that we have is SAP HANA. Now, in terms of functionality, both systems have the same base level of functionality. So within both, you can add a sales quotation, you can copy all of that in its entirety or elements of that to a sales order, you have a relationship map, you have a main menu. All of these things are going to be common across both platforms. But when we get into things like, for example, as you can see here at the top right, we have a cockpit or a cockpit widget or set of widgets within the SAP HANA version. We also have on this business partner master data screen that we have shown on this slide, a little section on the right there, which is showing some graphical or a visualization of your data, a technology called pervasive analytics. And again, that would be specific to the SAP HANA system. So if you don't have that, it might be because you're using the SQL version, and if you are using the SAP HANA version, you should have these things at least available and might be able to take advantage of those. So I'm going to take us into the Business One application and just show you some things there within the system, and show how you might be able to navigate some things. You may know some of them. I would doubt that everybody knows all of them, but we can at least go and have a look at that now. Okay. So here I am logged into my SAP Business One. The version that I will be showing today is the SAP HANA version. And so if it might not look exactly like what you have, but if it doesn't, you know the reason why that is. So within this version anyway, the cockpit widgets that I was talking about, if you do have this version, these are all the ones that I have at the top here at least are all out of the box, right? So these can be switched on and off as per your requirements based upon the role that you have within your business. There are about 80 or so of these that come out of the box. So if you are on the SAP HANA version and you have a screen that looks like mine but it has a big plus icon, it means that nobody has switched these on for you yet. But just to make you aware that you can have analytics within the application and make it relevant to what you're needing to see on a daily basis. Some of these widgets can be drilled down upon, and there will be some special widgets such as messages and alerts and common functions, which are shortcuts to various different places in the system, commonly used screens. Now, on that point, I just want to come over here to the main menu on the left. So this will definitely be true across both systems, and it doesn't look, I guess the search functionality that you can see at the top here, you do have that across both systems. It's just on the SQL version. You might have a window over here to the right-hand side where you could either search on data or you could actually search on menu items. But whichever system you're using, if I type into here, for example, sales order, my menu is shrunk and I can go and see the results that have met the criteria. If I just go and reduce that to sales, you'll see that I get a lot, much more results within that section. So as one way that you can use the system to go and get access to the parts of the system that you use most commonly without having to go and sift through a big complex menu structure to go first of all within the module and then perhaps as you might have to do already go into other sub-menus and sub-menus and so on. But there is another way that you can access these items quickly and easily, and I'd like to show you that today, and that would be the shortcut functionality. So let me tell you how that works. If, for example, I quite frequently go into the business partner master data screen, as you know already, you can access that from the main menu, but you're probably most likely quite often having a few clicks before you can get there. There is a shortcut function within SAP Business One that you can find within Tools. And if I go down to My Shortcuts, and I'm going to go and select Customize to show you how to set these. Within this screen here, using all of the F keys on your keyboard, you could assign the SAP Business One screen to these individual F keys. So you can see here that I have my F2 key has already been assigned to Business Partner Master Data. My F3 key has sales quotation assigned. Now, if I want to assign something else, or if you've never used this before, most likely you will come into here and nothing has been assigned. So if you're doing this for the first time, both would be the same for a first time or for a change. It's quite simply just a case of select the F key that you would like to assign a shortcut to. So I'll choose F3 in this case. We then go and select from the window list on the right-hand side, which of those windows would we like to open when we press that key. So if I click on sales order, for example, I can say, well, look, that's now what I would like to assign. And it's just simply a matter of pressing allocate. The shortcut has now been allocated. I can close that window. And if I press F3, I should have, with any luck, a sales order screen that appears, right? So it's really as simple as that. And I think most people in business today will be working within a certain area, right? So you don't necessarily need to have access to journal entries and purchase orders and sales orders and invoices, although I'll willing to bet there are at least one or two of you that need to go and span all of these different areas of the business. But ordinarily, you're still going to be using some screens more than others. So why not assign some of these shortcuts to make your life a little bit easier? There are also, and this might not apply to everyone, but if anyone does have a knowledge of what Crystal Reports is, so if you don't, I will just explain that any layouts that you have. So I mean, when you send an order confirmation to a customer, you might send them a quotation or an invoice and you're generating a PDF or printing that off. More likely than not, you will be having a Crystal Reports template that would be in the background. So that's one way that we can use Crystal Report templates to manage your document layouts and have everything presented on a page, nice and neatly, and showing the customer what they want to see with your branding. It's not the only use that we have of Crystal Reports, and some of you may already have reports that you use for analytical purposes. So you might want to go and set some parameters and give me some sales information or commission information or what purchases are outstanding. If you do have any Crystal reports like that, or you don't have some and you think that you might need them, we can look at that on a case-by-case basis with you if you need new ones. But the thing that you might not know is we have the ability to take these analytical Crystal reports and embed them within your main menu. So my main menu here has all of the same common elements that your main menu will have. You'll recognize sales quotation, order, delivery, and so on there. But what I already have done here within my sales report section, and again, you'll see many of the same items that you have as well, open items list, sales analysis. But I've added some of these Crystal reports within here as well. So if I was to take one of those, let's say, um, let's take this one here. Looks like quite a generic report. This report has been configured to go and ask for some parameters, right? We don't want to see all of the data from the entire system. So let's go and say, yes, we're happy to go and look at sales orders, posting date and year. Let's go and see if we can have. Okay, and I could go and select customer group, but in the end, I don't have any data. Let me just try another one. It would be nice to see one. There we go. Okay. So I'm looking from first of the first. I think this system will have data from 2020. So we're setting a date range. We're saying that we want to look at orders. We click OK. The report now generates and runs in the background. Oh, and incidentally, I have an error there, which is very good. But hopefully, if you're using these Crystal reports already, having the knowledge that you can access those quickly and easily without having to navigate to a file, run the file like you might do in Windows ordinarily, and have that being part of your SAP system might be an easier way to manage these reports and run these reports as an alternative to working with individual files and having to share those between people. Keep everything central and keep it as part of the system. I do want to show you how to navigate individual screens, and I think there's a few concepts here that not everyone uses, so it would be very nice to cover. So since I've set this already, I'm going to press my F3 button to get me back into a sales order screen. And whenever you go into any of these transactional screens in Business One, ordinarily the screen will be in add mode, right? So if I'm adding a new order in this case, which is perfectly fine, might very well go and do that now, it's already in ads mode, but there's also different modes, right? So I could set this into find modes and start to go and find previously entered documents. Let's cover a couple of quick concepts in terms of when we might be in add mode and when we might be in find mode and how to find various different documents. So if I'm adding a new sales order in this case, I want to find the customer that I'm looking to add. Some people know these by their account codes off by heart. Some people want to go and utilize the name. But I have a customer called MaxiTech, for example. I don't know what their account code is off by heart, so I want to add in a sales order. How do I go about doing that? Well, many people might know this idea of if you put an asterisk in any one of these boxes, you can go and get a list of elements that you can go and select from. So like I will do here, I now have a list of all of my customers. Doesn't really help me at this stage, although I can see MaxiTech down there. So given that my list isn't too big, I would be able to go and select them, but many of you will be dealing with thousands and thousands of different business partners. So how can we make that a little bit easier? Well, what this asterisk is, it's a wildcard. So it means if you go and type in part of the text surrounded by asterisks, you will be able to reduce that set of results. So if I type in M and an asterisk, for example, you can see that I now got all of the business partners beginning with M, and you can see, of course, MaxiTech in that list. And if I were to type in Maxi with an asterisk, well, there is only one business partner that matches that criteria. The system then knows In this case, that is who you need. We're going to go and populate that for you, right? And again, it's a very similar process when you get into anything with a grid in Business One. So if I press tab, I get a list of everything. If I want to go and filter that list down, I could do it either by item code or I could actually do that by description. So if I type in the description Milner, I get all of the products that have Milner within the description somewhere. Okay, so that's the idea, and from there you can make the job of data entry easier as well. Rather than selecting codes one by one, you can use Control and Click and select multiple items or deselect those items. You can also select ranges as well. So if I do Control Shift and Click, I select everything between the first one that was clicked and the second one that I've clicked. But I'll just select a couple of items here that I want to go and add on to this sales order. If I click on choose, all of the selections that I've made will now be added to this particular order. When I'm within the order, want to make you aware of a few things that are not all that commonly used, but these things can be accessed many different ways. There are always some additional pieces of functionality that could either make the job of finding related data or inserting or deleting data a little bit easier. So with regard to that, if I were to go and click, for example, on my quantity field here, I have a whole host of different options when I right click, and many of you may not know that these exist. But I can check for that item whether it's available. So do I have enough stock in? Do I have enough stock coming in? There's a report that you could run for that, which would be another one would be similar to that, would be an available to promise report. But there are also some of these options that are particular to the field that I'm right-clicking on. Right? So in this case here, a batch serial numbers report, or do you want to allocate these batch and serial numbers at the point of sales order, which is something that you can do. If you do want to do that, you can open that screen and you can manage that. But you'll see if I go and click on the unit price over here, I don't have that option, but I do have an option for another screen, which is related to price, which is a last prices report. So show me the last price that this customer paid for this item. Show me the last price that that item was sold to. You can set other filters on that screen, and I'll let you look at that separately. But we do have other, I guess, information that's sensitive to the screen or to the field that you're actually right-clicking on. The last thing before we get on to the next section that I want to do is just in terms of dates, because I quite often see people keying in dates in a very laborious format, right? So the normal thing, for example, if I were to type in the 10th of 10.10.24, we'll say that's the delivery date for next year. You can do that and you can assign that date that way, but Business One has a few shortcuts which might be able to help you. First of all, if you just key in the numbers without the separators, SAP will interpret those numbers and it will put the separators in for you. So you could really get a bit more rapid. You don't have to key out the whole date either, right? If I type in the 10th of October, if I'm doing it in 2024, I do need to go and key in the date. If I'm doing it in 2023, SAP will take those 4 digits and say, well, right, okay, you mean 2023, so it will enter that for me. If I just type in the day element of that, it will say you mean this month and this year, so it goes and changes that to September now. If I were to go and type in a character in here, so if I type in T for today, it enters today's date, and if I type in a Y for yesterday, no, you all guessed that wrong. It still uses today's date. It doesn't have any logic in there to go and put in yesterday's dates. Any character is going to resolve to today's date. So if you just want today's date in any field in Business One, you could either use in any character, or you can actually type in a 0 and you will get today's date as well. The other thing that you could do is you could actually calculate. So if you say, okay, we'll deliver that to you in 3 days, and you go, right, okay, is that, what is it in 3 days? It might be right at the end of the month, and you're going, do we have 30 days in this month? Do we have 31 days? You don't need to bother with that, right? All you do, if you want to go and say, I want this field to have 3 days into the future, put in a plus and a 3, and Business One will calculate that for you. Not that this is going to be much good for the delivery date, But if you do need a date in the past, maybe when you're running some reports, you could put in a minus, and if I put a minus in 10 there, for example, it gives me the 28th of August. So again, just some little shortcuts in order to go and help you to navigate the system. And again, the same applies in find mode. So if you want to put this into find mode, again, you'll find it. Please have a look at these pull down menus. I think they might be useful for many of you because you can have many keyboard shortcuts that you could be using. So for example here, I'm still currently in add mode. If I want to set this form into find mode, I can press Control and F, as you can see in here, in order to go and put this screen into find mode, which I will do now. I don't want to save the sales order that I've added. And you can see now we have the find button down here. I can go and search for criteria, find the, so for example, if I want to find a purchase order that has 998877 in there, I could use my asterisks again. I can get a list. I can see there are two results, but it's actually the first one that I want to find. I'll double click on that one, and now I'll be able to see that sales order on screen. Okay. Good. Okay, so let's continue on to our next point, user authorization management. So within, so some of you will have this set up to a degree, I'm quite sure, but there's several different concepts, and some of these have been added into Business One as time has gone on. So we have the general user authorizations, whether someone is able to go and access a screen or not, and if they can access the screen, do they have a full authorization to the screen, or are they operating on a read-only basis? So those things could be managed within the user authorizations. We also have the ability to then say, well, how would we like to copy those authorizations to other users? Is it a copy to one user, or are we wanting to copy authorizations to many users? And one of the more recent things that SAP added is the concept of user authorization groups. So can we set authorizations with respect to a group and have users actually assigned to that group? So I'd like to show you some of those pieces now. So your basic authorization screen, ironically, if you have authorization to get into this screen, is found within administration, system initialization, and authorizations. Now I go into general authorizations here. You should see a screen like I had just shown on the slide there a moment ago, a list of users down the left-hand side, and within each user selection, they will have or potentially can have a unique set of authorizations. If I were to go to, for example, let's take this one here, we can see that we can manage those authorizations and change those if we have permission to do so. Each section within here will have many subsections, right? So I can go into the general and I find lots of different system settings, and if I go into the sales area, you can see that I can now control for this user, for a sales quotation, do they have authorization to access this? So we can give them full authorization, read-only access, or no authorization at all, where they just don't get to go and see anything. If I go and look at another user within here, we'll take this one, Connor. Everything for Connor is actually grayed out, and he seems to have full authorization for everything. The reason for this would be that he might be marked as a super user. In fact, I would know in this case that this user is marked as a super user because a super user has everything assigned. Super user has to be able to have access to everything. So there is no ability within the system to start restricting any access to anything. What do we do if we want to go and copy permissions from one user to another? Well, there's actually a couple of ways that we can do that, right? If we're wanting to do that on a one user to one user, and we could say, for example, on this user, we want to take their settings and authorizations and apply them down to this user down here. So if it's a simple case like that, you can actually click on the name on the left-hand side. You can drag that name onto the user that you would like to apply the new settings to, and then you get a message to say, would you like to apply the settings from first user to second user, which you can say yes or no to. If you want to take a single user and say, well, I've set up all of the permissions for them quite well, I don't want to do that job for everyone, I just want to go and copy it, there is another utility down here where you can actually say, For the user that has been selected, I would like to take their authorizations and copy it to, and you just really have all of the users that can accept permissions being applied to them. Tick the boxes, click OK, and those permissions are now part of their privileges. But what do we have in terms of groups and how do we manage groups? So you can see here, if I click on this groups tab, I have some groups already defined on the left-hand side, finance, sales, and so on. These two, if you click on these, you could go through the hierarchy of different screens in Business One and say, well, look, yes, we have read-only access, full access, or no authorization at all. These can be defined and added to. You can, like you can do with users, you can copy permissions from one group to another group. So it might be you have two different sales levels of permission. You might want to use one as a base for the next one. So you can do that and you can copy, but where do you manage groups and how do you assign users to groups, right? So I'm just going to go and take you into a different section within the main menu here. If I go into administration setup, um, general, and then user groups. User groups apply to more than just authorizations, but authorizations are the ones that I'm going to look at today. Now, if I look at finance here, you can see that I already have a number of users assigned to that finance group. Similar in sales, right? So if I want to go and add people to this finance group, and I'll pick one of the ones that I looked at earlier there, Douglas, he is now added to the finance group, but you can add users to more than one group, right, to go and apply permissions. Although these groups might have conflicting levels of permission within each different element or each different screen. But if I take Douglas, for example, and add him to the finance and the sales group, I can click OK, that's updated. And just to let you know about this, if I go back to the authorization screen, whenever I'm looking at permissions that would relate to, if I can find them here again, there we go. You have this other column on the right-hand side, which is an effective authorization. So you can apply authorizations at a user level, you can apply them at a group, and you can have a single user being a member of more than one group. When you take the highest level of your group permissions, and add them all together, what's the highest level that you have? This becomes your effective authorization, and you can see there whether you have whether that user actually has permission to that screen or not. Okay. Okay. I want to speak about backing up data and restoring data. And there are many ways that you could actually do this. And I think to some degree, the ways that you would have available to you would be dependent upon whether you're using a HANA system or whether you're using a Microsoft SQL system. But regardless, both are very similar in terms of the approach that you would need to take. I just want to explain to you what some of the options are and how that might fit in and how secure you might be and what the usefulness of backing up data would be. So in terms of whether it is HANA or whether it is SQL that you're using, both systems come with a database management tool. So on the SQL version, it's called, as we have there, SQL Server Management Studio. And within HANA, you have something called the HANA Studio. Both tools are really designed for a database administrator to do things like backing up databases and restoring databases, renaming them, adding queries and views and things like that, and stored procedures to databases. Those types of things can be done. And both of them would be graphical tools. I'll show you both in just a second very briefly, but they're graphical tools where you can right-click and back up and do those kinds of things. But you could also, because these database engines react to commands like queries, if you're familiar with those, and you can use commands to go and back up databases as well. There is another tool that you can have or utilize, which comes as part of every SAP system, which is the SAP System Landscape Directory. Within here, you can control which databases are backed up and restore databases from backups, that type of thing. As well as what some people will have is third-party backup software. So you can have backup software that will explicitly hook into a database engine and say we want to, in addition to maybe backing up files and directories, we want to take a database backup and actually go and store that somewhere. Okay, but yeah, I think maybe the key point that I'd like to get across is backing up databases in itself is a good thing to do, but it's only one part, or should be only one part of your overall disaster recovery strategy or policy within a business. I think backing up databases and thinking I'm covered in any eventuality is not necessarily the case, right? So we maybe just go into the next slide and explore what other elements that you might need to consider depending on a bad situation occurring. So a database backup is one element of your overall system. There are other elements as well, which is the database engine itself. You have the SAP Business One software that would have been installed during an initial implementation. And you might have add-ons, you might have other software that does integrations, you might have software sitting on a server that has nothing to do with SAP at all. And depending on your infrastructure, whether you have an internal server in the office or whether you have a server in the cloud, you might have other parts of your overall system, such as servers that you can log on to get access to your SAP Business One. So having database backups doesn't necessarily cover you in the event of disaster in every single case. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that. I'm sure some of you will be very technical and know this already. Some other people it might be news to you. But where database backups are useful would be in the event of perhaps data corruption, perhaps the wrong data had been entered, perhaps you had tried to maybe update a batch of descriptions and for whatever reason it had failed and you've made a mess of the data and you would like to go and recover what was there this morning and reapply that. That's where database backups might be useful in allowing you to restore to a previous point in time. So let's have a quick look at how some of these elements work. Now I don't have a Business One database here, but this is SQL Server Management Studio. I'm logged in already. I'm connected to the database engine. I can see within here my list of databases. And backing up a database is just really as simple as right-clicking, selecting tasks, selecting a backup option, and then from there, there'll be some options that you need to choose. Do you want to take a full database backup, which is most applicable in most SAP Business One scenarios? Where do you want to back it up to? And there'll be some other options. I'm not going to take you through all of these today, but that's the basic bones around how you would back up a database using this tool. To restore is actually quite simple as well, right? So if I just right-click it on one of these, I can right-click, click restore. Do I want to restore a file or file groups or a database? Again, you get a very similar window. So this is how it's actually managed within here to go and make backups and restore backups. That would be your SQL or SQL version. Within SAP HANA, actually, but to do that job, quite similar, except the terminology changes a little bit. We don't call them databases in SAP HANA. We call them catalogs because we need to have a different name. And we don't say that we are creating a backup. If I take that database there and right-click on this one, you can see that the option that I have here is import and export rather than backing up and restore. Exactly the same thing, to be honest with you. It's just different terminology across both systems. And you would get screens that would look somewhat similar to the ones that we just looked at. In terms of commands, if I go and click on this one here, this happens to be an SAP HANA command, but this would be a command that could be used in order to go and export a particular database to a particular location. And if I want to go and restore that, it would be a command like that. So if that's all a bit technical, it's probably more important that you know that these things exist rather than know the exact typing to do in order to make these things happen. But the reason that these are useful is when you start to understand the different ways that you can back up and restore databases, you start to understand how you might be able to use that as part of your overall strategy against disaster recovery scenarios. So it's always good policy to back up databases, but it shouldn't be the entirety of your fail-safe against any attacks or anything going wrong within your system. Okay, so system monitoring, again, it really falls into a very similar category, I would say. When you're using SAP Business One, you want it to be running ideally smoothly, seamlessly. and without any pauses or breaks in the operation. Um, there are a few components that you have that really should be monitored. And again, how to monitor them is probably a bit technical for this session, but knowing what the parts are that should be monitored is a bit more useful. First thing I would like to speak about is RAM. So memory, random access memory. Your system needs this to run. The more users that you have using a system, the more RAM that a system needs to have. And there are some metrics that we use to calculate how much RAM would be appropriate for SAP Business One depending on the environment. So that's one aspect. CPU or processors is another aspect. So anytime any application is running, it needs to have a CPU to run. Do you have the right number of CPUs or levels of CPUs in order to allow your SAP Business One system to run efficiently? Disk space. It's quite a common problem that we come across where, going back to the previous point, backups, right? Where do the backups go? If the backups are made continually on a daily basis and sit on the SAP server and are never removed, you don't have a policy of removing those, you're going to run out of space, right? And as soon as you run out of space, the SAP Business One system is going to fail to operate. So while it's a good policy to have a backup procedure in place for your databases, it's also a good idea to clear those out or maybe save them somewhere else once the system gets full. But I think there should be someone for every system monitoring how much space that you have available, what your RAM utilization is like, whether your processor utilization is spiking, which might contribute all, unfortunately, towards the overall platform. And the platform itself is obviously we have these hardware components that we're relying upon, but each sitting on top of these hardware components, we have the application. And sometimes they're prone to errors. It might be conflicts with other software. It might be permission-based. But the platform itself, so this would be looking at things like Windows error logs to see, is the SQL Server running properly? Is the SAP application running properly? Did it crash? Why did it crash? What was the error that we received? You should have someone within your organization, whether it's you or whether it might be someone else, monitoring these things to ensure the good health of your SAP system. The web client. So I said to you that I would explain that the web client exists. So some of you may know this already, but the web client is, again, more of a recent introduction to SAP Business One. In order to make it, I guess, more flexible and able to be used by people out with the four walls of the office as well as potentially inside the office. So that would be really who it would apply to. You might be using the normal Business One application, but you want to be out on the road and have access to your data, or you might actually just be wanting to use Business One from a Mac or something. It's a Windows-based application, so it gets a bit difficult to use it on Linux and Mac and any other operating systems. But you can use it through the web, right? So you still get access to Business One. In terms of functionality, SAP are really investing in the web client and adding new functionality to this all of the time. They started off very light, so we would have access to some of the sales, purchasing, and master data information, and they've expanded that to add in service and various other parts of the system. I'll show you this in a second. But we don't necessarily have exactly the same experience in the web client as what you would have with the installed client or FAT client, as some people might call that. There would be a few fundamental differences. So things like add-ons. We don't have the ability to run add-ons. So if any of you see screens when you're logging into Business One, it might say a common one would be Boyum Usability Pack, which I'll discuss at the end. If you have any add-ons in the system, these would not apply to your web client. Your web client would be like going back to a vanilla SAP Business One, if you can imagine that, and using that type of functionality. So if I go, I'll show you how you can check to see if you have, so I'll just move this down a second. Okay, so on my toolbar here, I have a shortcut that's going to take me to the web client if you have security certificates installed, which would be a good policy if you're using the system. There we go. You'll not get these same browser error messages that I have. In fact, and let's just run this one in Chrome. Okay, so we select the company that we want to log into. Same credentials as you would have within your normal SAP system. And again, those little messages with a properly installed certificate you would not have. Should mention that the web client is available regardless of whether you are using the SQL version or the SAP HANA version of SAP Business One. Although this looks very much like the HANA version, you do have this available in both. So as soon as I log in here, I get access to all of my widgets like I would have in SAP HANA, and I can drill into these and get more insights. I'm just going to give you a quick example here of what happens when I click on one of these headers. So I get into widgets that are sensitive to the element that I've clicked on. I have a main menu up here on the top left if I'm going to click on this button. So if I go into sales and sales orders, for example, I will open a screen that will allow me to go and interact with sales orders, manage those, add in new ones. Start off by having a list of all of my sales orders in here. And I can use these filters. So go and search for a particular element. I will have links through the application because it is a proper web application. So I can go and hover over these and get more information. I can view more information by going to the individual business partner screen. So it's not, I guess the important thing is to know that this exists. There's obviously a whole session that we could do on the web client in its own right. But I think, do you ever have situations where you would like to have access to your data but don't necessarily have that, or you might need to go and connect to VPNs and you don't want to do that? The web client might be for you, right? So it's definitely something to look more into if you think that might apply to you. Okay. In terms of deploying it, just as a final point, I would like to say that it's actually quite easy to do. So if you have Business One deployed already, the software is there, right? It comes as part of the system. There's nothing extra to install. What you might need to have, depending on whether it works just out of the box, is there might need to be some configuration of the services, and most likely there would need to be some configurations done on maybe a purchase of a SSL certificate, and maybe some firewall rules would need to be applied, that type of thing. But hopefully knowing that it's there might spark your interest to go and look into that more if that would be a benefit to you. Upgrades and patches. So this is really just a simple point to say that they exist, right? So some people will implement SAP and leave it the way that it is because it works for a long period of time. But there are some important principles of upgrading Business One and the patch levels that are released. So there are two different elements of this: major versions and patch upgrades, as they used to be called, or now as we call them, feature packs. Packs would be released every quarter and would contain things like bug fixes and minor additions of functionality, whereas major versions would be more dramatic changes in functionality, and they would be a bit more intensive in terms of downtime for you to go and upgrade to different versions. So and if you've gone from 9.3 to version 10, that would be a major version upgrade, for example. the last sort of 3 points there, the benefits of keeping up to date really feed into the other two in terms of how you're supported as far as SAP Business One goes. SAP have a policy of having products in either mainstream or transitional support. So for a period of time, it does vary depending on the version that you're on, but SAP will say this major version is supported up until a certain date, and we can give you those dates for your version, after which you're moved into something called transitional support. So the risk really for any business is if you're on a piece of software that's within transitional support, you really need to have, you're really putting yourself into risk, right? Because if your application develops a problem, the government might say, we need to go and have you reporting in this way, and you don't have it in your system. Making tax digital would be a really good example of that. SAP would have released many feature packs to go and adapt to the changing elements within the UK that HMRC implemented to go and adapt to how tax returns should be submitted to them. But the key thing is those were only available within the feature packs, and the feature packs are only available on the more recent versions. If you're running SAP Business One 9.2, for example, there are no more feature packs that are available for this version. So you would find that as your system needs to change and adapt, you would find that you wouldn't be able to get access to that latest functionality unless you upgrade. Feature pack upgrades are less intensive, and so usually within a day or so we can upgrade your system by using a feature pack. A major version upgrade is something that should be much more considered. We have to look at what's connecting into your system, what add-ons do you have, are they compatible with the latest version, do we need to go and obtain a new copy of those versions, and so on. In terms of supporting, SAP will continue to attempt to support, as Milner Brown will, regardless of which version that you're on. We always have a best endeavor approach to these types of things. But where SAP have implemented a fix to a particular problem, we quite often find that one of our clients might be on an older version of SAP. It's fixed in a more recent feature pack, and the only real solution to fixing the problem is to say, well, look, you need to go and upgrade to the next major version. So it's sometimes to alleviate any potential problems, it's sometimes a good idea to keep yourself up to date anyway, so that your system has the latest security patches, the latest functionality patches, all built in. And in terms of security, I just wanted to mention a couple of points in terms of what SAP do. So we've mentioned really already the user permissions. Maybe taking that a little bit further, not something I'll go into in great depth today, but when you want to get down into maybe not screen level authorizations, but field level authorizations, SAP does have the ability to allow you to design your own forms. It's quite a complex and more technical task. But for example, if you wanted to hide, I don't know, maybe the freight amount that was on a sales order because that's particularly sensitive in your business, you can actually say, I want to hide this field, I want to show this field, I want to move this field around, hide this entire tab, and start to say, well, that's an alternative template for a sales order, for example. And if that were the case, you can say, right, I'm going to use that sales order template for Joe or Harry or whoever it might be, whereas Bob and Ben might have a different template because you allow them to see more things. So just to mention that, in addition to the user permissions and the group permissions, you also have the ability to design forms as well. One thing that SAP has done in more recent years, and this would apply to people who have more than one company that they're using in Business One, SAP used to be designed both in terms of HANA and in SQL, where if you have 10 companies, we need to have a database user. So this is not a username and password you would type in really unless you're the admin of the system. But the application has to connect to your database, and this was usually all done through a single funnel. What SAP have introduced now is to say if you have 10 companies, there will now be 10 different channels where Business One will connect using one set of credentials that only has access to company one if you're logged into company one. And if you log into company two, SAP will connect through a different channel but only has access to company 2. So where this might be useful is, I guess in previous years, for technical people that had the ability to go and write queries within the application, they potentially had access to all of the data across all of the organization. Whereas now SAP, what they have done is they have constrained that so that if a user has access to all 10 companies, great, they can access the data within those. But if they only have access to maybe 2 or 3 of those, they only have access to 2 or 3 of those. So it's a data security enhancement, really. Data ownership. So we've looked at whether how you can look at screens, even discussed how you can restrict things by fields. What about actual records, right? What about if you have a supplier record or maybe even an item record or a transactional record, and you don't want to have everybody seeing everything? SAP does have the concept of data ownership, where you can be an owner across an entire organization, but you can also set permissions to say, well, look, only the owner can see this sales invoice and they have some sensitive information, or only the owner can see the supplier account. And you can manage that really on a business partner level or a transactional level. And you can decide, I'll just mention this, if you go into the general settings, so administration, system initialization and general settings, within that screen, within the business partners tab, you can actually decide whether you want to have a business partner data authorization model, or whether it's based on documents. And if it's based on documents, you pick and choose who has access to it or not. If it's on a business partner model, the permissions at a document level are inherited based upon who has access to see that business partner's documents or not. I'd like to speak briefly about cloud hosting. So again, one of the things that you might not be using, where is your SAP? Is it on a server in your office? Is it in the cloud somewhere? How is it being looked after? So thinking back to the database backups and the overall health of your system, do you have a plan in place for that, right? And if you do or if you don't, it might be worthwhile reviewing. But in terms of how we might be able to help with that, Milner Brown offers a cloud hosting service. So it is a private cloud hosting service, which cloud is one of these funny words that means a lot of things to a lot of people, and some people really just don't, it's quite a broad term. We offer private cloud hosting, which means that on our servers, we isolate some of those servers and you have an environment that you can access, our technical team can access, but it's not shared necessarily with anyone else. It's your particular environment with your SAP that we can switch on and off and upgrade in isolation from everyone else, and to some degree protected from what our other clients are doing. The system is scalable, so for a fixed cost that you pay annually, we can grow or we can shrink that system to cope with the changing needs of your business, really. As you're adding staff, as you're adding maybe doing more projects, you can have a fixed budgeted idea of how much cost that you're going to have from an IT perspective, or at least from a SAP perspective of what you're going to need to spend extra to go and accommodate that new project, or onboard those new staff. Will it meet your particular company's needs and work within your company's IT policy? Well, the reality is that we have about 50% of our clients at the moment who would be hosted, have their SAP Business One hosted. And the way that we've designed our hosting is to be very flexible. So we'll have some clients who, maybe a few technical terms here, but who will want to go and connect via a VPN. We'll have some that want to have extra endpoint security protection. Some of our clients want to have their domain connected to the domain that would control the SAP Business One cloud hosting. Really, whatever the scenario is, we can look at that and we can see whether we can fit within your IT policies and even make some suggestions. We've done this a lot now, have a lot of experience, and I would be surprised if we couldn't cater to what most of our clients would like to do. In terms of performance, we designed these servers so that they work specifically for SAP Business One. Right? They are normal servers that can be used for any purpose. But in terms of one of the elements I mentioned earlier, processing power, we have selected a level of processor for anyone that's interested. By default, our servers use Intel Xeon Gold processors. And really the driver for this is we find, particularly for an SAP HANA system, it's really that level that's needed in order to make it run seamlessly and smoothly. And that's always what our goal is whenever we offer hosting. We try to take all of the complexity of RAM, hard disk, CPU, space, users away from you, take on the burden of that ourselves and give you really something that runs SAP without you having to worry about it too much. Which also relates to the safety of your data in terms of we back up all of these servers daily, the full entire image. So it's not necessarily just a database backup, but it's the entire server. It's your Business One installation, your configurations, any add-ons that are there are backed up already. Any integration software that's there is there already as well. So it's really if your business is growing or you don't feel that managing your IT infrastructure is becoming a bit of a pain or a burden, it might be something worthwhile speaking to us about. And finally, I want to speak about Boyum. So I'm going to tell you that Boyum have been around for quite a while in terms of SAP Business One. They are a company based in Denmark who specialize in designing software that complements the SAP Business One application. And the thing that they're most famous for is the one I'm speaking about today, the usability pack. The usability pack can be thought of as, I quite often describe it as a halfway house between a custom development that you might think that you need and a vanilla out of the box SAP Business One system. So you might need a button for this, a report for that. You might want to change the color of something, as you can see on the screen there. You might want these to be conditional. So if the customer is overdue, show them in red. If they're not overdue, show them in green. If they're over a credit limit, but you know, they pop up a message as the order is being added to the system and not at the end tell the user that the customer is over the credit limit. These types of things are things that you can do with Boyum. So if you find that you're quite often having to adapt or work around the functionality that you have in Business One to cater for a particular business process, Boyum might be a good solution for you. It doesn't necessarily replace everything that we can do with development. It's quite flexible, the software development kit for SAP, but it's not always the case that you should jump into development when a tool like the Boyum usability pack might be able to meet your particular needs. It's quite easy to deploy and it's quite affordable as well, where you can start off with a minimum of 5 users for a certain price, and you can discuss those with your account manager, and then you can add users to the system as well. Usually takes, depending on what you want to do with it and what training that you would like to have, usually takes somewhere between a day, 2, maybe 3 days at the most to get you up and running with Boyum, depending on how much you want to take on board of it yourself. I'm going to just give you a quick look here in terms of what Boyum is and how Boyum actually works. So if we go back into Business One here again, and I'll go into, I'll press my F2 shortcut here to go into the Business Partner Master Data screen. There we go. And I'm going to go and find my company I was working with earlier, MaxiTech. So one thing you might see on my screen that's different from your screen is these buttons over here, right? They're not standard. They're built as part of the Boyum usability pack. Now, I'm going to show you what these do, right? So I have a few buttons here. I'm going to focus on this one, open quotations. So what does it do when I click on it, right? It gives me a report of any open quotations that this customer has. I have quite a few here. And I can click into each of these quotations as well. I've built that button because I don't really have a handy link here like I do for deliveries, orders, and account balances. If I right-click on here, again, if I have permission to do this, I can get into the Boyum functionality, which is all here, and I can add something called validations. I can move things around the screen, but I'm wanting to edit the function buttons in this case, just to show you what this one does. Now, behind each button is something called a universal function. And listen, if you're not technical at all, it's still good to know this is how it works. Don't pay too much attention to the coding and the technicalities of this. But if I go and drill into now this universal function, which is the building block of Boyum, it will have a query in there in the background. And so I'll just let that load up. But the query is actually taking data from other places in business. One, it's saying for the current customer that I have on screen, give me a list of all of the quotations. And obviously, because it's a query, all of this type of functionality can be customized. So there's a huge amount of things that you can do with Boyum. This is just one very simple example of what you can do. If you think it might apply to you or you want to have more information on that, please let us know and we would be happy to speak with you further about it. Okay. That's us at the end of this session. I'm going to answer the questions in just a moment, but before I do, I just want to let you know that the next session that we will be covering is on Thursday, the 5th of October. That session will be covering master data management and will be with my colleague, Connor McCann. So we hope to see you on the next one. And if I could just also remind everyone, if you will be getting a copy of this recording and the slides that I've presented here today. And if you do receive a feedback survey, if you would kindly take 2 minutes to go and fill that up for us, we would really appreciate your feedback and your input as to how today's session went. Be looking forward to hopefully having you on the next session where you'll be very welcome. Thank you very much, everyone.